So I'm going to be teaching you guys what memory leaks are if you don't already know. And I'm also going to be teaching you guys and telling you why they are actually ruining your game. So what I'm talking about is basically a memory leak is when you make a connection to an event. So let's say, for example, we got the player. So let's say we said local player is equal to game.localPlayer. Now let's say we made a connection to an event every time a character was added. So we'll say player.character added : connect to a function. So this is basically going to run every single time the character is added back to the game. So if they like reset or something, and then for example, let's just have our print message. So let's just print character was added. Now this is actually not that much of a problem because all we're doing is printing out a message. But when you start to write more code, so for example, if you made like a complex, maybe like double jump system every time the character was added, or just any complex code here. So let me give you guys a good example. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this right here. Real quick guys, if you guys have been wanting to learn how to script on Roblox, check out the first link in the description. So let's say for our complex system, we made another connection to an event. So let's say we had a run service.heartbeat. So I'm going to go ahead and get the run service up here. So I'm just going to say local run service is equal to game : get service. And let's say every time a character was added, I wanted to do run service.heartbeat : connect to a function. So if you guys don't know what run service.heartbeat, it basically fires every frame based on the character's frames per second. So it just runs really fast basically. So let's say inside of here is where I wanted to add the complex. Let's say for example, I was making a double jump system here. And every time our character gets added, I wanted to make a new event to run service.heartbeat. Well, the problem with this is that eventually once our character gets added, like let's say for example, we die 10 times, what happens is we create 10 new different connections to this run service.heartbeat, and that basically eats up our GPU, our RAM, and it makes our game just run a lot slower. So let me give you guys a better example. So let's say we had a table here. So this is a fake table, and each time our character was added, we make a new connection to run service.heartbeat. So let's say first we make a connection 1, then we make another connection 2, then we make another connection 3, then connection 4. So as you guys can see, basically all of these, they're still running in the background. So for example, connection 1 is still running, connection 2 is still running, connection 3 is still running, and connection 4 is now running. So there's really no point in doing this when you only need one connection. Because the proper way to do this is whenever you encounter a situation like this, or whenever you make an event that you know you will not be using in the future, what you want to do is you basically want to add a connection to it. So when you add a connection to an event, you're basically able to disconnect from that event whenever you would like. So I'll give you guys a good example. I'm just going to say local connection is equal to nil. So I just make a simple variable called connection. And right now the value assigned to it is just nil. So now what I'm going to do before I actually run this heartbeat, I'm going to go ahead and say if connection is equal to nil, and then I'm going to say connection is equal to run service.heartbeat : connect to a function. And then I actually start running the function here. So if it's our first time making a connection, then our connection will obviously be equal to nil. And I should add that I'm going to go ahead and add this up here at the top of the script. So that way it gets set once at the top, and every time a character gets added, it does not go back to nil. So I'm going to go ahead and put this at the top there. And then here I check if the connection is equal to nil. Then I go ahead and set the connection to a new run service.heartbeat here. And then here I'm going to say else. So if the connection already exists, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say connection : disconnect. So that basically disconnects whatever connection is assigned to the variable. And then I'm going to say connection is equal to nil to go ahead and reset it back. So guys, I actually think a better way of doing this is instead of checking if it's nil first, I'm going to go ahead and check first if connection does not equal nil. So first I'm just going to go ahead and check if there's a connection. And then if there is a connection, I just simply disconnect it real quick. And then at the bottom here, I'll just make a new connection. So for example, connection is equal to run service.heartbeat : connect to a function, and then I'll just print out hello here. So now every time a character gets added, it doesn't make new events here. It has one event, and if it's already connected, then it disconnects it, and then it makes another event. So this is a good way to make sure our game is running to its maximum potential. Because if you don't do this, and let's say for example, like for each player, you had like 10 different connections to a heartbeat event, it would just literally like take up so much of the RAM, and it would just make your game a lot more slow, and there's literally no reason why you should do it. So guys, a general rule is that whenever there's an event and you know you're going to be making multiple events just like it. So for example, like if there was a for loop for whatever reason, so if you had a for loop that ran 10 times and you're making new events every time, so let's say run service.heartbeat : connect to a function. If it's something like this where you're making multiple events, then you want to go ahead and implement the system. So that way you keep track of all of the events and you can disconnect them when you don't need a specific event anymore. So I'm going to show you guys also a cool way to keep track of your connections. So let's say you had multiple connections and you wanted to be able to disconnect them. Well, you could just simply add them into a table. So we could say local connections is equal to an empty table. And then instead of saying local connection is equal to nil, I'm going to go ahead and comment that out. We could go ahead and say connections and then set the key to the player. And then we'll set it equal to connection. This has to be connections with an S. Or I guess we would just set this equal to nil for now because technically there's not a connection. So now inside of this character added, for example, we could get the connection. So we'll say local connection is equal to connections, pass to the player as the key, and then it'll get whatever connection we currently have. So when the script first runs, obviously it's going to be nil because we set it to nil. So if it's the first time running, then it's just going to go ahead and skip this because it's going to be nil. And then it's going to go straight to this. So we just set this connection here to run service.heartbeat. And what we could do instead is we could just say connections and then pass to the player here is equal to run service.heartbeat, connect to a function. And now each time the character gets added, we could just look inside of this table of connections for our connection and then check if it's nil or not. And then from there, we could just disconnect it. And then here we could do connections, pass to our player is equal to nil. So yeah, that's a pretty good way to keep track of your connections, which is by having your connections inside of a table and then basically just retrieving them whenever you need to disconnect them. So now what we're going to do is we're basically going to print the connections table at the top every time our character is added to make sure that there's only one connection in the table every time we respawn. So as you can see in the first iteration when we actually spawn in, the table is empty. And then if you were to reset our character, as you can see now, we have a table here and it just has one instance. Let me go ahead and make this a bit bigger. So it has one instance, which is me, and then it has our connection, but it can't read it as a string. So let's say, for example, we respawn again and our character gets added again. As you can see, a new table prints out and it still only has one connection. So that basically ensures that we're not using unnecessary memory in our game that just kind of like compounds up. Because let's say you had 5 players in your game and each of the 5 players had a different 10 connections, like it would just get pretty messy. So yeah guys, that's going to be the whole video. I have a program that teaches you how to script in Roblox Studio. It basically brings you from beginner to advanced. So if you're interested in that, it'll be in the link in the description. But other than that guys, thank you for watching. I hope this helped you and peace out.